I remember the exact moment I knew I was going to die. Not the kind of knowing that comes from fear or paranoia. The kind that settles into your bones like cold water. The kind that makes everything slow down, makes every detail sharper than it has any right to be. The dust particles floating in the air. The smell of diesel and sweat. The way the sunlight cut through the haze like a blade made of gold. I remember all of it. I remember thinking that this road would be the last thing I would ever see. That my boots would never touch American soil again. That my mother would receive a folded flag instead of a phone call. That everything I had planned for my life, every dream I had postponed, every conversation I had put off, would remain forever unfinished. I was 26 years old. I had a girlfriend back home who was waiting for a ring I had not yet bought. I had a father who I had not spoken to in 3 years because of an argument I could no longer remember. I had a list of things I wanted to do when I got back. A list I kept folded in my wallet like a promise I made to myself. And in that moment, in that silent, heavy, suffocating moment, I knew none of it would happen. I knew the desert would take me. But I was wrong. What I am about to tell you is not a story I made up. It is not something I exaggerated for attention or embellished for dramatic effect. Every word of this is true. Every detail is burned into my memory like a scar that will never fade. I am telling you this because I believe you need to hear it. I believe there is someone listening right now who is standing on their own silent road, facing their own impossible moment, wondering if God is real or if faith is just something we tell ourselves to feel better about the darkness. I was that person once. I was the skeptic who went to church out of habit but never truly believed. I was the man who wore a cross around his neck because his mother asked him to, not because he thought it meant anything. I was the soldier who trusted his training, his weapon, his brothers in arms, but never trusted the God they prayed to before every mission. And then that morning happened, and everything I thought I knew shattered like glass against concrete. By the end of this story, you will understand why I am still breathing. You will understand what it means to feel the presence of something greater than yourself in the very moment you are certain your life is over. You will understand that miracles are not fairy tales. They are not metaphors. They are not comforting lies we tell at funerals. They are real. They are possible. And sometimes they happen to people who do not even believe they deserve them. My name is Kenneth. I grew up in a small town in Tennessee, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the church bells ring every Sunday morning whether you are listening or not. My mother was a woman of deep faith. She read her Bible every night before bed. She prayed over meals, over decisions, over problems that seemed too small for divine attention. She believed that God was involved in every detail of her life, from the weather to the price of groceries to the health of her children. My father was different. He believed in hard work and results, in things you could see and measure and control. He did not disrespect my mother's faith, but he did not share it either. He went to church because she asked him to, sat quietly in the pews, shook hands with the pastor afterward, and then went back to living his life as if none of it mattered. I fell somewhere in between. I wanted to believe. I really did. But belief felt like something that happened to other people. It felt like a language I could hear but never quite speak. When I enlisted, my mother gave me a small silver cross on a thin chain. She pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it and looked at me with eyes full of tears and said that no matter where I went or what I faced, God would be with me. I thanked her. I hugged her. I wore the cross under my uniform because I loved her and I wanted to make her happy, but I did not believe it would protect me. I believed that survival was a matter of training, luck, and timing. I believed that some men came home and some men did not, and there was no divine formula that determined who belonged in which category. I was a practical man, a realist, a soldier who dealt in facts. And then the facts stopped making sense. My unit had been deployed for 7 months when it happened. 7 months of patrols, of waiting, of tension that never fully released. 7 months of heat so intense it felt like the air itself was trying to kill you. 7 months of watching the people around you and wondering which ones wanted you dead. We had lost 2 men in that time. Rodriguez, who stepped on an explosive device during a routine sweep, and Collins, who was hit by a sniper while standing in what we thought was a secure area. Both deaths were sudden. Both deaths were reminders that no amount of training could prepare you for the randomness of war. You could do everything right. You could follow every protocol, and you could still die because you were standing in the wrong place at the wrong second. That knowledge lived in all of us. It was the constant hum beneath every conversation, every joke, every moment of silence. We did not talk about it much, but we all felt it. We all carried it. The morning of the attack started like every other morning. I woke up at 0500. I ate a breakfast I do not remember. I checked my gear 3 times because I always checked my gear 3 times. I loaded into the second vehicle of a 4-truck convoy and took my position. The mission was supposed to be routine. A supply run to a forward operating base about 40 kilometers down a road the locals called the Devil's Spine. We had driven that road before. We knew its dangers. We knew its curves and its blind spots and the places where enemy fighters like to hide. We were cautious but not afraid. We were alert but not paranoid. We were soldiers doing what soldiers do. The sun rose fast and hard, the way it always did in the desert. By 0700 the heat was already oppressive. I could feel the sweat pooling beneath my body armor, dripping down my spine, soaking into the fabric of my undershirt. The vehicle smelled like diesel and dust and the stale remnants of the energy bars we had eaten the day before. The man next to me, a corporal named Davis, was talking about his daughter. She had just turned 3. He had missed her birthday because of the deployment. He was showing me a picture on a small printed photograph he kept in his breast pocket. She had curly hair and a smile that took up her whole face. She was wearing a pink dress and holding a stuffed rabbit that was almost as big as she was. Davis said that when he got home, he was going to take her to Disney World. He said he was going to buy her every stuffed animal she pointed at. He said he was going to make up for all the time he had missed. I nodded and smiled and said something about how beautiful she was, but my mind was somewhere else. My mind was on the road. There was something wrong, I could not explain it. There was no evidence, no visual threat, no reason for alarm, but the silence was too complete. The emptiness was too absolute. Normally there would be signs of life along this route, farmers, vehicles, children playing in the distance, but that morning there was nothing. The landscape was still. The horizon was empty. And deep in my gut, in that place where instinct lives, I felt something cold and tight beginning to form. I reached under my uniform and touched the cross. I did not pray, not exactly, but I held it for a moment, felt the cool metal against my fingers and thought about my mother. I thought about the way she believed, the way she never seemed to doubt, the way she spoke to God like he was sitting right next to her, listening to every word. I wondered what it would feel like to have that kind of certainty. I wondered if I would ever understand it. I let go of the cross and returned my attention to the road. We were less than 5 kilometers from our destination. The tension in my chest was beginning to ease. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself the silence meant nothing. I told myself that in a few minutes we would arrive at the base and I would laugh at my own fear and everything would be fine. That is when the world exploded. There was no warning, no time to react. One moment we were moving forward and the next there was a flash of light so bright it erased everything. A force like nothing I had ever felt lifted the vehicle into the air. I remember the sensation of weightlessness. I remember the sound of metal screaming as it twisted and tore. I remember my body being thrown against the interior of the vehicle, my helmet striking something hard, my vision going white and then black and then something in between. I remember heat. I remember pressure. I remember the smell of smoke and burning rubber and something else, something I did not want to identify. And then silence. The worst kind of silence. The kind that comes after disaster, when the world has not yet decided if you are alive or dead. I tried to move. My arms would not respond. I tried to speak. My lungs would not fill. I was trapped in my own body, aware of everything and able to do nothing. Fear came rushing in like floodwater, cold, absolute, overwhelming. I had been trained to manage fear. I had been taught techniques, strategies, methods for staying calm under pressure. None of it mattered. None of it worked. I was going to die. I was certain of it. I was going to die in this burning vehicle on a road in the middle of a desert, 10,000 miles from home, and no one would ever know what I felt in my final moments. This is it, I thought. The words were calm, the words were certain. This is how it ends. I waited for the darkness to take me. I waited for the pain to stop. I waited for whatever came next, whether it was nothingness or something else, I did not know. I just waited. I had no strength left to do anything but wait. That is when I felt it. Not a physical touch, not a hand or a presence I could see, but something that pressed against the fear inside me, something that pushed back against the chaos and the noise and the certainty of death. It was like a warmth that started in my chest and spread outward, filling the places where the cold had settled. It was like a voice without words, a message without language, a knowing without explanation. And then clear and quiet I heard it. Not today. 2 words, that was all, but they were not my words. They did not come from my own mind. They came from somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere I had never accessed before. They came with authority. They came with certainty. They came with a peace so profound it did not make sense. I was lying in a destroyed vehicle. I was surrounded by smoke and fire. I was injured in ways I had not yet understood. And yet in that moment I was not afraid. In that moment I knew I was going to survive. I still cannot explain it. I have tried. I have gone over that moment 1,000 times in my mind, searching for a rational explanation, a psychological phenomenon, a neurological response to trauma. I have read about near-death experiences. I have studied the way the brain processes extreme stress. I have looked for any alternative that would allow me to dismiss what happened as a trick of the mind, a survival mechanism, a hallucination born of oxygen deprivation. But I cannot. I cannot because I know what I felt. I know what I heard, and I know that it was real. Training took over, not consciously, not deliberately, but somewhere beneath the shock and the pain and the impossible peace I felt, my body remembered what to do. I forced my arms to move. I forced my legs to respond. Every motion sent fire through my nerves, but I kept going. I had to keep going. The voice had told me it was not my time, but that did not mean I could simply lie there and wait for rescue. It meant I had a chance, and I was not going to waste it. I crawled toward the light, toward the opening where the door had been torn away. The smoke was thick, burning my lungs with every breath. The heat was intense, pressing against my skin like a living thing, but I kept moving, inch by inch, hand over hand. I did not think about the pain. I did not think about the danger. I only thought about the next movement, the next inch, the next breath. When I finally pulled myself out of the vehicle and onto the ground, I lay there for a moment, staring at the sky. It was blue, perfectly, impossibly blue. The kind of blue that makes you believe in beauty even in the middle of destruction. I remember thinking how strange it was that the sky could be so peaceful while the world beneath it was chaos. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. If you believe in Jesus, I want you to subscribe to this channel. Not for me. For the stories, for the testimonies, for the truth that so many people need to hear. Every day we share stories like this one, stories of faith, stories of miracles, stories that change lives. If this is speaking to your heart, if something inside you is stirring right now, that is not an accident. That is God reaching out to you. Subscribe. Join this community. Let these stories remind you every single day that you are not alone, that God is real, and that His love for you is greater than anything you have ever faced. Now let me tell you what happened next. The sounds came rushing back. Gunfire, shouting, the chaos that follows every attack. I realized we were not just dealing with an explosion. We were under direct fire. Somewhere beyond the smoke, enemy fighters had positioned themselves to ambush whoever survived the initial blast. This was coordinated. This was planned. And I was lying in the open, exposed, vulnerable. I forced myself to move again. My body screamed in protest. My vision blurred at the edges, but I crawled toward cover, toward a small rise in the terrain that would shield me from the incoming fire. Every second felt like an eternity. Every foot I covered felt like a mile, but I made it. I pressed my back against the dirt and tried to steady my breathing. Someone shouted my name. I looked up and saw Ramirez. He was about 20 meters away, helping another soldier toward cover. When he saw me, his face changed. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened, but no words came out for a moment. Then he shouted it again. "Kenneth, you're alive." I did not answer. I was staring past him, toward the vehicle I had just crawled out of. What I saw made my stomach drop. It was destroyed, completely destroyed. The place where I had been sitting moments before was gone, replaced by twisted metal and fire. There was no logical explanation for how I had survived. The blast should have killed me instantly. The fire should have consumed me before I could escape. The structural damage should have trapped me beyond any hope of rescue. But I was here. I was breathing. I was alive. Ramirez reached me and dropped to his knees beside me. His hands were shaking as he checked my injuries. "How?" he kept saying. "How is this possible?" I had no answer. I had only the memory of a voice that was not my own, and the certainty that something beyond my understanding had just saved my life. The firefight continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Time loses meaning in combat. It stretches and compresses according to its own rules. I remember fragments, the sound of our weapons returning fire, the shouts of commands being relayed across the chaos, the arrival of air support, the roar of helicopters cutting through the smoke, and then slowly the sounds of battle fading, the enemy retreating, the danger passing. When it was over, silence returned. But this silence was different from the one that had preceded the attack. That silence had been filled with dread, with the premonition of disaster. This silence was filled with something else, something that felt like grace, something that felt like gratitude, something that felt like the presence of God Himself settling over the wreckage and the wounded and the survivors. The medics arrived quickly. They moved through the convoy, assessing injuries, prioritizing the most critical cases. When one of them reached me, he looked at my wounds and then looked at the vehicle I had come from, and then looked back at me with an expression I will never forget. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. He did not mean it as a question. He meant it as a statement of fact. According to everything he understood about physics and biology and the realities of explosive force, I should not have survived. I should have been among the dead. But I was not. I was sitting in front of him, bleeding but breathing, injured but alive. I wanted to tell him about the voice. I wanted to explain what I had felt in that moment when death seemed certain, but the words would not come. They felt too sacred, too personal, too impossible to articulate. So I just nodded. I just let him treat my wounds. I just let the reality of my survival slowly settle into my consciousness. The evacuation took several hours. I was transported to a field hospital about 50 kilometers from the attack site. The journey was a blur of pain and exhaustion and the constant whisper of that voice replaying in my mind. Not today, not today, not today. By the time we arrived, the shock had fully set in. My body trembled uncontrollably. Tears streamed down my face, not from pain but from something deeper. Something that felt like grief and joy and disbelief, all tangled together into an emotion I had no name for. That night in a hospital bed, surrounded by the sounds of medical equipment and the quiet groans of other wounded soldiers, I held my mother's cross in my hand. The metal was warm now, heated by the proximity to my body, but it felt different than it had before. It felt alive. It felt meaningful. It felt like a connection to something I had spent my whole life avoiding. I whispered the only words I could find. "Thank you." 2 words, the same number as the voice had spoken to me. But these words were different. These words were not a command or a promise. These words were a prayer, my first real prayer. The first time I had spoken to God not out of habit or obligation, but out of genuine, trembling, overwhelming gratitude. I did not sleep that night. I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flash. I felt the impact. I heard the chaos. But I also heard the voice. And the voice was louder than the memories. The voice was stronger than the fear. The voice reminded me that I had been spared, that I was still here, that my story was not over. In the days that followed, I had a lot of time to think. The injuries I sustained were serious but not life-threatening. A concussion, several broken ribs, lacerations and burns that would leave permanent scars. But I was alive, and according to everyone who saw the wreckage, I should not have been. The military conducted an investigation into the attack. They analyzed the explosive. They studied the vehicle. They calculated the force of the blast and the probability of survival for anyone in my position. The numbers were not good. The numbers said I should have died. The numbers said there was no rational explanation for my escape. But I had an explanation. It was not rational. It was not scientific. It was not something I could write in a report or present at a briefing, but it was true. God saved my life, not because I deserved it, not because I was special, not because I had earned his favor through prayer or righteousness or any of the things I thought qualified someone for divine intervention. He saved me because that is who he is. He saved me because his grace does not operate according to human logic. He saved me because he had a purpose for my life that was not yet complete. That realization changed everything. I returned home several months later. The physical wounds healed slowly, leaving behind scars that would mark my body for the rest of my life. But the internal transformation was even more profound. I was not the same man who had boarded that plane to deploy. I was not the skeptic who wore a cross to make his mother happy. I was not the practical realist who believed survival was a matter of luck and timing. I was someone new, someone who had encountered the living God in the moment of death and survived to tell about it. My mother cried when I told her the story. She held me like I was still a child, her tears soaking into my shoulder, her body shaking with sobs of relief and joy. She said she had prayed for me every single day. She said she had felt a peace about my safety even when the news from overseas was grim. She said she had known, somehow, that God was watching over me. I used to think that was wishful thinking. I used to think that mothers believed those things because the alternative was too painful to accept. But now I understood. Now I knew that her prayers had been real. Her faith had been justified. Her God had been listening all along. The girlfriend I had left behind became my wife 6 months after I returned home. I gave her the ring I had planned to buy before the deployment, a simple band that represented promises I intended to keep. We married in the same church where I had sat as a child, listening to sermons I did not believe, watching rituals I did not understand. But this time was different. This time I stood at the altar with tears in my eyes, fully aware of the presence of God in that place. Fully aware that I was alive because of grace, fully aware that every moment I had with this woman was a gift I had not earned. My father came to the wedding. We had not spoken in nearly 4 years, the argument between us grown into a silence that seemed permanent. But when he saw me at the altar, something in him broke. I saw it in his eyes. I saw the walls come down. After the ceremony, he pulled me aside and said he was sorry. He said he had been too proud, too stubborn, too afraid to admit he was wrong. He said he had almost lost the chance to reconcile with his own son, and that realization had haunted him. I hugged him for a long time. I told him I forgave him. I told him I loved him, and I meant every word. The reconciliation with my father was not instant or easy. We had years of distance to overcome, years of words left unspoken, years of wounds that needed healing. But we worked at it. We talked. We listened. We learned to see each other not as adversaries but as family. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, we rebuilt what had been broken. I tell you this because the miracle did not end on that road in the desert.